Welcome, everyone. It often feels like the big story, creation, redemption, restoration. It gets chopped up. We hear about these amazing moments, the garden, Noah's Ark, the Red Sea parting, the cross.
Yeah.
Maybe see them as separate snapshots, but when you look deeper, there's this incredible realization. These aren't disconnected events at all. They're actually chapters in one single continuous story, a story stretching across all of history creation, the fall, and then a very deliberate plan for restoration, all pointing towards one central figure. So today we want to try and connect those dots, really give you that unified perspective on what it all means.
And, to even start that conversation, we have to anchor it somewhere absolutely fundamental. The starting point has to be the necessity of a creator.
Right.
The fact that anything exists, that there's order instead of just nothingness, it demands an explanation. And logically, physically, the primary answer can't be chaos. It can't be just random chance. The very structure of reality points to an intelligent origin.
Okay, let's dive into that. Section 1, the foundation. We have to start right at the beginning. A definitive beginning. I mean, science itself confirms this, right? The universe as we know it, it had a starting point.
Exactly. The Big Bang Theory, the expansion, all of space, time, matter, energy kicking off simultaneously, that needs an explanation.
Because if the universe began, it's an effect. And every effect needs a cause.
Precisely. And that cause, logically, must be outside the effect. It has to be external to space and time because it initiated space and time.
So we're talking about something eternal, intelligent, existing beyond the system it created.
It's like that old saying, isn't it? Every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. He's outside the house he built.
That's a great way to put it. And when you actually examine the house, the universe itself, the evidence for that builder, well, it's just staggering. This world doesn't run on accidents. It operates with incredible, predictable precision.
Like ironclad rules. The laws of physics aren't suggestions, are they? They're constant. They're elegant. It's why you can almost think of it like, I don't know, a perfectly coded simulation or a game world where the underlying physics engine is just flawless.
That consistency is one thing, but you mentioned something more: necessity.
Yes, it moves beyond just, it works well, into it had to be this precise. This is what physicists talk about with fine-tuning. It's not just that the universe is stable, it's balanced on an unbelievably sharp knife's edge.
Okay, this is the part that always blows my mind. How fine are we talking? Give us some examples of this fine-tuning.
Well, take the cosmological constant. It dictates how fast the universe expands. If it were just a tiny bit larger, everything would have flown apart too quickly. No stars, no galaxies, nothing structured could have formed.
And if it were smaller,
It would have collapsed back on itself almost immediately. The precision needed there is estimated at 1 part in 10 to the 120th power. That's a number so vast, it's basically incomprehensible. 0.119 zeros, then a 1. Or think about the fundamental forces, like gravity and electromagnetism. Gravity is incredibly weak compared to the electromagnetic force. If you tweak that ratio even slightly, stars either don't ignite properly or they burn out way too fast for life as we know it to ever have a chance to develop.
so it's not just complex, it's specifically tuned for life.
Exactly. It points strongly towards intentional anticipatory design. It suggests we're not just some cosmic accident, random particles bumping around. There seems to be purpose baked in.
And that brings in the moral dimension, doesn't it? If there's design and intention, there's likely purpose.
Precisely. Design implies purpose, and purpose implies value, which leads straight to morality. Look across all human history, every culture, every time period. You find this deep, innate sense of a moral law.
Like knowing some things are just wrong.
Right. Everyone intrinsically knows that, say, torturing an innocent child just for fun is wrong, or that courage is better than cowardice. This isn't just social conditioning, it runs deeper. This universal moral compass, you see it even in very young children, points directly to a moral lawgiver, someone who stamped a reflection of his own character onto his creation.
But that perfect design state, governed by this close relationship, it didn't last. It fractured right at the start in the garden.
That's the tragic turn, isn't it? The first great break. And it wasn't some huge dramatic rebellion initially. It was actually quite subtle, but the consequences were catastrophic.
What was the core choice?
Adam and Eve essentially chose their own judgment, their own desire for independent knowledge over the clear word of their creator, trusting self instead of trusting God. That single choice shattered the connection, the family bond between humanity and God.
And the fallout was immediate.
Oh, absolutely. That sense of spiritual separation, alienation, hiding that came instantly. And then the physical consequences followed. Toil, pain, suffering, symbolized by the thorns and thistles, the difficulty in labor.
But it's interesting, the physical laws didn't break down, did they?
That's a crucial point. Gravity still worked. Light still traveled at its constant speed. The underlying code of the universe remained intact because those laws belonged to God. But humanity, now spiritually separated, was living in friction against the very harmony, moral and physical it was designed for. The structure held, but the relationship and humanity's experience within that structure was deeply damaged.
So that initial fracture sets the stage for a downward spiral.
It really does. And humanity went downhill fast. After that first fall, there's this long period, maybe around 1600 years leading up to the flood. People lived incredibly long lives back then, which actually allowed corruption to really take root and compound.
And the description of that time is pretty stark.
It's chilling. The text says mankind's every intention was only evil continually. Think about that. Not just occasional bad deeds, but a pervasive, systemic corruption of the human heart and imagination.
But there was more going on than just human sin, wasn't there? Something cosmic.
Yes, and this is where the narrative gets even deeper. It wasn't just human failure. Genesis chapter 6 talks about the sons of God. Now, the understanding here is that these were spiritual beings, angelic beings who had fallen, who then crossed a forbidden boundary.
Also,
They intermingled with human women, resulting in unnatural unions. And the offspring of these unions was the Nephilim.
the Nephilim, we hear that term a lot. Giants, mighty men.
What was the significance of this? Why was it such a critical issue?
Think of it strategically, almost like a spiritual warfare tactic. This was an attack by the enemy forces. The goal was to corrupt the human bloodline itself.
To pollute the human race.
Exactly. If human DNA, the very essence of humanity, could be fundamentally compromised by mixing it with something non-human, something fallen, well, think back to the very first promise after the fall. The seed of the woman crushing the serpent's head.
Right. If the enemy could corrupt that seed, taint the lineage from which the promised Redeemer was supposed to come, then God's entire plan of redemption could potentially be thwarted. The Nephilim phenomenon was a direct attempt to sabotage the coming of the Messiah by preventing a pure human lineage.
Wow. Okay, that completely changes the perspective on the flood then. It wasn't just God losing his temper.
Not at all. It becomes an act of radical, necessary surgery. An intervention, yes, but one driven by preservation after centuries, literally centuries, of patience running out. It was about cleansing the earth to save the one remaining pure human line, Noah, who's described specifically as blameless in his generations, likely meaning his lineage was untainted.
So the flood preserves the human line through which the promise can continue.
Precisely. Through Noah and his family, the covenant promise, the path for the Redeemer, remained viable, and the ark itself becomes this powerful symbol. One door, sealed shut by God, protected from the judgment waters by pitch. It's an unavoidable foreshadowing of Christ, the one way to salvation, sealed by his sacrifice. And it's not just a story told in isolation.
You mean the flood legends?
Exactly. The
Yeah.
fact that you find flood narratives strikingly similar in core details in cultures all across the globe, ancient Mesopotamia, predating even the Hebrew accounts, China, Mesoamerica, indigenous tribes everywhere, that points strongly to a real, shared, catastrophic historical event burned into collective human memory.
Okay, so humanity gets a reset, preserved through Noah. But the root problem, sin in the human heart, obviously survived the flood.
It absolutely did, which leads us almost depressingly quickly to the next major act of rebellion, Babel.
They were supposed to spread out, weren't they?
That was the command God gave Noah's descendants, feel the earth. But again, there's this impulse towards self-reliance and control. They congregate on the plain of Shinar. They decide
What was the motive?
Their stated goal was to make a name for ourselves and to avoid being scattered. It's the same core sin as the garden and before the flood. Human pride, centralization of power, and direct defiance of God's instruction. Let's build our kingdom, our monument.
God promised no more floods. So how does he respond this time?
The judgment takes a different form. Instead of water, it's division. Since they refuse to scatter willingly, God intervenes directly by confusing their languages. Communication breaks down, forcing them to separate and, ironically, fulfill the original command to spread across the earth.
But there's a spiritual dimension to this scattering too, isn't there? Something about how the nations were then governed.
Yes, this is absolutely crucial for understanding everything that follows. After the scattering from Babel, the narrative indicates something fascinating happened. God, in a sense, assigned spiritual authorities, celestial beings, sometimes called sons of God, again, like in Deuteronomy 32, to oversee these newly formed Gentile
Like
nations.
governors.
Sort of. Spiritual governors or stewards. It seems like an attempt to maintain some kind of order. But here's the tragedy. These appointed beings also fell. They rebelled. They began to crave worship for themselves, diverting the allegiance of the nations away from the one true creator.
So when we read about ancient paganism, the worship of Baal, Molech, Asherah, all these different gods, that wasn't just primitive superstition.
According to this understanding, no, it wasn't just empty folklore. It was, in reality, devotion directed towards these real, fallen spiritual powers. These rebellious sons of God corrupted the nations they were supposed to guide, often introducing horrific practices like child sacrifice, cult prostitution, really dark stuff. They essentially established rival spiritual kingdoms.
That casts the entire Old Testament in a different light. Israel versus the nations wasn't just political, it was spiritual warfare.
It absolutely was. God chooses one specific people, Israel, through Abraham, to carry his covenant promise, while the rest of the nations are largely operating under the influence of these fallen, rebellious spiritual entities. That cosmic conflict is the engine driving so much of the biblical narrative.
Okay, so the world is fragmented, largely under the sway of these fallen powers. How does God move his plan forward? You mentioned Abraham.
Right. With the world basically in spiritual chaos, God focuses his plan by selecting one man, Abram, later renamed Abraham. This is where the visible arc of restoration truly kicks into high gear.
And it starts with a covenant, a promise.
Yes, and crucially, it's presented as an unconditional covenant. That word unconditional is key. God didn't base his promise on Abraham's ability to keep his end of the bargain because Abraham, like everyone, was flawed and often failed. God guaranteed the outcome based entirely on his own faithfulness.
How's that demonstrated? There was that ceremony, right, with the animals.
That's one of the most dramatic moments, yes. Normally in that culture, when two parties made a binding covenant, they'd cut animals in half, lay the pieces out, and both parties would walk between them. It was a self-maledictory oath. If I break this promise, may what happened to these animals happen to me.
But Abraham didn't walk through.
Exactly. Abraham is put into a deep sleep, and God alone, represented by symbols of his presence, a smoking fire pot and a flaming torch, passes between the pieces. It's breathtaking. God is essentially saying, I swear by myself, I will fulfill this promise. The guarantee rests entirely on me, even if it costs me everything.
Wow, and that promise included.
It guaranteed a nation descending from Abraham, Israel, promised them a specific land, and crucially pledged that through one particular descendant of Abraham, all nations on earth would eventually be blessed. It's the foundational promise of global redemption, secured solely by God's character.
So that unconditional promise through Abraham is the bedrock. But then later, through Moses, Israel receives the law at Sinai. That seems very conditional. Do this and live, disobey, and face consequences. How do those two fit together? If grace secured the promise, why introduce law?
That's a vital question, and the understanding is clear. The law given through Moses, the whole system established at Sinai, was never intended to be the way to salvation or earning God's favor. If righteousness could come through rule-keeping, then the earlier unconditional promise to Abraham would be pointless.
So what was the purpose of the law then? The Ten Commandments, all the statutes?
It served a few critical functions. First, yes, it defined God's standard of righteousness, it showed what perfection looked like, but maybe even more importantly, it acted like a mirror. Or maybe an MRI machine. It was designed to expose the depth of human sinfulness, to show people that by their own effort, they could never perfectly meet God's standard. It revealed the disease. When Jesus later intensified the law, saying lust in the heart is adultery, anger is murder, he was driving home the law's primary purpose, to stop every mouth, crush human pride, and demonstrate that everyone, without exception, falls short and desperately needs mercy.
So the law reveals the problem, the need for forgiveness,
Yeah.
and the sacrificial system that came with the law.
The sacrificial system was the temporary stopgap measure for dealing with that revealed sin. Think about the constant cycle. Daily offerings, yearly Day of Atonement, Passover lambs. This relentless shedding of animal blood served as a powerful, ongoing object lesson.
What lesson was that?
That the blood of bulls and goats could never truly, permanently take away sin. It could only cover it temporarily. It was like making minimum payments on an infinite debt. It showed the cost of sin, life for life, but also pointed ahead, constantly reminding people that a better, perfect, final sacrifice was still needed. The whole religious apparatus of Israel was, in essence, a giant arrow pointing forward.
Pointing towards.
Towards Christ. Jesus arrives as the absolute fulfillment of everything the Old Testament system anticipated. He's the substance to which all those shadows pointed.
So, he fulfills the prophecies, the covenants.
Every single one. He's the ultimate ram in the thicket that Abraham saw foreshadowed on Mount Moriah. He is the perfect, unblemished Passover lamb whose blood averts judgment. He is the suffering servant described in Isaiah 53, pierced for our transgressions centuries before he was born. It all converges on him.
And his life itself bore witness to this.
Yeah,
The miracle.
absolutely. His miracles weren't just random acts of power. They were specific signs demonstrating his identity and authority. Turning water into wine showed power over creation. Calming the storm showed power over nature. Raising the dead showed power over death itself.
And even the demonic realm recognized him.
That's fascinating, isn't it? While humans were debating, questioning, doubting if he was the Messiah, the demons knew exactly who he was. They'd cry out, "I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Their unwilling testimony is powerful confirmation.
Which brings everything to the climax. The cross. This seems like the ultimate paradox. How can God's perfect justice, which demands punishment for sin, be reconciled with his infinite mercy, which desires to forgive?
The cross is precisely where those two seemingly irreconcilable attributes meet and are perfectly satisfied. It wasn't a tragedy or a mistake. It was the predetermined focal point of all history.
How did it satisfy both?
Justice demanded that the penalty for universal human rebellion, which is spiritual death, separation from God, be paid in full. Mercy longed to bridge that separation. The only solution was for someone who was both fully God, and therefore infinite and perfect, and fully human, and therefore able to represent humanity, to take that penalty upon himself.
So God himself, in the person of Jesus, paid the price his own justice demanded.
Exactly. And when Jesus cried out from the cross, "It is finished," that wasn't a gasp of defeat. It was a declaration of victory. Paid in full, the debt was canceled, the sin barrier erected in Eden was torn down, the spiritual powers who had usurped authority were defeated and publicly disarmed. The entire weight of humanity's failure was dealt with in that one moment.
Okay, the debt is paid. What happens next? Where does the story go from the cross?
The next chapter is utterly foundational, the resurrection. This isn't just a hopeful epilogue, it's the linchpin of everything. The resurrection is the historical, verifiable proof that Jesus is the Son of God, that his sacrifice was accepted by the Father, and crucially, that death itself, the ultimate consequence of the fall, has been conquered.
And the impact on his followers was immediate.
Transformative. Think about it. These disciples went from being a terrified, scattered group hiding behind locked doors after the crucifixion to becoming this absolutely fearless, unstoppable force that turned the world upside down. What changed? They saw him, alive. Eyewitness testimony fueled the explosion of the early church.
And they weren't just left with memories. They were given a mission and power.
Precisely. Jesus didn't just ascend and leave them to it. He commissioned them to take this message, this gospel, to the entire world. And he empowered them for that mission by sending the Holy Spirit at Pentecost.
So the Spirit is the power source for the church now.
Yes. The coming of the Spirit is the engine that continues the work, that continues the cosmic battle. Every time the gospel is preached and someone believes, it's like reclaiming territory that was lost way back at Babel and Eden. It's actively pushing back against the influence of the god of this world, who seeks to blind people to this truth.
And the New Testament writings, like Paul's letters, they flesh out the implications of all this.
They absolutely do. Paul, Peter, John, they lay out the doctrine clearly. Salvation isn't earned. It's a free gift received purely by grace through faith in Christ alone. That message completely dismantles any system of trying to earn God's favor through works or religious rituals. It offers true freedom, not freedom to sin, but freedom from sin's power, lived out through the power of the indwelling Spirit.
So here we are, nearly 2,000 years later. We're living in what seems like a very long pause in the action.
That's right. The narrative describes this current era as a period of extended divine patience. It's been almost 2,000 years since Jesus ascended, since Jerusalem was destroyed and the Jewish people scattered. It's crucial to understand this long stretch isn't because God is indifferent or forgetful. It's driven by his mercy, his desire for more people to hear this story and respond.
But it won't last forever. There's a deadline.
There is absolutely a deadline, and Jesus himself gave us a stark warning, a specific signpost for what the end of this period of patience will look like. He said it would be as it was in the days of Noah.
Now, when most people hear days of Noah, they think extreme wickedness, violence, maybe those Nephilim again.
And yes, wickedness will be rampant. But Jesus emphasized something else alongside it, something perhaps more insidious. He highlighted the normality of it all.
Normality.
Yes. He said people would be eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, just going about the ordinary routines of life, completely absorbed in the day-to-day, complacent, distracted, focused on their own immediate concerns, their comfort, their plans.
So it's a combination. Rampant underlying corruption alongside widespread distraction and complacency.
Exactly. That's the chilling parallel. On the one hand, you have a potential return to that Genesis 6 condition, imagination, corrupted, pervasive evil. But on the other, and perhaps more dangerously for many, you have this overwhelming normalcy bias, this sense that things will just continue as they always have. People are busy living life, completely unaware of the approaching storm.
That sounds unnervingly like the warning to the church in Laodicea in Revelation.
It's a perfect parallel. That Laodicean condition, believing you're rich, prosperous, self-sufficient, having need of nothing while actually being spiritually impoverished, blind, and naked, it's the danger of comfort leading to complacency. Our generation, particularly in the West, often enjoys unprecedented material comfort, and the risk is becoming spiritually lukewarm, unaware of the lateness of the hour, blind to the urgency.
So this entire narrative, this single story from Genesis to now, it converges on a point of decision for each person listening.
It absolutely demands a personal response. You can't just passively observe this story. It makes a central, unwavering claim. Jesus Christ is the only way back to God. He is the only door, as he put it.
It's not enough to just admire him or even believe God exists in a general sense.
No, the narrative is clear. Restoring that broken relationship, finding salvation, requires placing your personal trust, your complete faith, in Christ alone for forgiveness and reconciliation. There's no other name given under heaven by which we must be saved. Accepting this means accepting the right order of everything.
What does that mean, the right order?
It means putting God's kingdom and his righteousness first in your life. That fundamentally changes everything. It redefines what you consider success. It determines where you invest your time, your energy, your resources, what you truly treasure. It even dictates what you should and shouldn't ultimately fear.
The evidence seems laid out, prophecy fulfilled, the historical record, the current signs.
The evidence is overwhelming when you look at the whole picture. Fulfilled prophecy validates the past. The state of the world reflects the warnings about the present. The choice becomes unavoidable. But delay is incredibly dangerous. Remember God's warning before the flood, "My spirit shall not always strive with man." Patience has limits.
So we've traced this incredible unified story. It starts with the Creator, details a fall, outlines a meticulous plan of redemption centered on Christ, and warns of an approaching climax. It's a narrative held together by God's unwavering faithfulness, but it ends with a note of real urgency. The evidence, from the cosmos down to ancient history and the unique story of Israel, it all consistently points to this one Redeemer.
And think back to Noah. He wasn't saved by chance. He was saved because, amidst a world consumed by normalcy and corruption, he heard the warning, he believed it, and he moved with fear, building the ark. He acted on the information.
While everyone else just kept eating and drinking.
Exactly. Today, the ark, the place of safety, is Christ himself, and the door is still open. But here's the final thought to really grapple with. What if the biggest deception in these last days isn't some obvious, terrifying evil that everyone recognizes? What if the most effective deception is simply the constant, ordinary, comfortable noise of everyday life? The noise that lulls you into believing you have plenty of time, that the deadline isn't real, that you can decide later? What if complacency is the deadliest trap of all?
A powerful question to end on. It really compelled you to step back, look at this whole unified picture we've discussed, and seriously reevaluate your own life, your priorities, your focus, in light of it all. The story is coherent, the evidence is presented, and as you said, the hour is getting late.